Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the ACEC Research Institute's Future of Engineering Roundtable series in today's session, Retaining the Workforce and Leaders of the Future. Before we get started, I just have a few housekeeping announcements. For the easiest view, move your mouse to the top of the screen and select Gallery View. This will allow you to see all panelists. Your microphone was muted upon entry, but if you wish to ask a question or offer a comment, please feel free to type it into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will do our best to answer as many questions as time permits. This event is open to the media, and the press is invited to participate as well with our other attendees by asking a question through the Q&A box. We will also be recording today's event for future viewing. If you require any technical assistance, please feel free to send a message to ACEC Research Institute privately through the Q&A box, and I will be happy to assist you. Now, allow me to introduce the Executive Director of the ACEC Research Institute, Daphne Bryant, who would like to say a few words.
Thanks, Carrie. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending where you are. Welcome. We are excited to continue this series that we started a couple of weeks ago related to future generations and looking at what are those generations looking for from a recruitment standpoint, how are we retaining them, and then our third series, which will be later this month, on how do we move them into leadership and into ownership. And so we're excited for this session. We had a great session a couple weeks ago talking about recruitment. We did bleed a little bit into retention, but this panel is a new panel that's here to talk about retention. We've got experts from the HR side of things, the human talent piece, and we've got just a great group. We had a warm-up session last week and a lot of fun talking about this topic, so we're excited to share with you. So I am going to turn it over to Kevin McMahon, who is our Senior Research Consultant at the ACEC Research Institute. He is going to moderate the session, and he's going to introduce Jeremy and Audra and Annie and Masai. So Kevin, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Daphne. We've assembled an outstanding panel today. As Daphne indicated, we have a young professional engineer, Audra from Wilson & Company. Jeremy is the Director of Talent and Recruitment at Zweig White, a major consulting firm in our business. Annie is the Director of DEI at Ulteg, and Masai is the Director of Talent and Recruitment at Gannett Fleming, a major firm specializing in infrastructure. There you see their descriptions up there. And we're going to start the panel by asking Audra, who's our young professional engineer from Wilson & Company. Audra, you're the prime target of a lot of efforts such as this panel, your generation. So what are the key factors that would compel you to stay with your current firm instead of considering outside offers? And before you get into that answer, have you gotten outside offers?
Yes, I have gotten multiple outside offers.
So what are the key factors that have compelled you to stay where you are?
So for me, it's definitely the people and the culture. In all honesty, throughout my career at Wilson & Company, the amount of trust and empowerment that leadership has given me, it's been really incredible. I honestly believe that they have more confidence in me and believe in me more than I believe in myself.
Awesome answer, Audra. Thanks. I'm sure we'll be getting back to that trust and empowerment topic. Jeremy, as the leader of one of the major consulting firms specializing in this space, what strategies have you found most effective in retaining early stage professionals, particularly in this ultra competitive market?
So some are more complex than others. Some are rather easily, like take onboarding programs, for example. I think those really set the tone for new hires. If you can create an onboarding program that presents your company culture, a sense of purpose, a sense of future, you're creating a first impression that will be a lasting impression. So I always encourage firms to begin there. I think beyond that, getting a bit more complex, certainly clear career pathways and a progression matrix is an important feature. It just gives people a sense of stability and future and purpose that I think is intrinsically an anchoring mechanism. especially for people in our younger generation, that sense of belonging and purpose seems to be really, really important to them.
Jeremy, thanks so much for that answer. The progression matrix, can you expand on that? What does that mean in
Yeah.
real life terms for firms?
Thanks for asking for that clarification. It means looking at the positions that are part of your organization and creating overviews of those positions in a way where an employee like Audra could easily access a job description for a position that might present an optional career pathway for her or a linear career pathway for her. So just giving people visibility into the competencies tied to roles that are essential to the overall operations and performance of the firm. And then performance managing people against those competencies.
Great, thanks for that answer. Annie and Messiah, as senior HR professionals, before we get to the next topic of diverse workforce, I'd like to just ask you to follow up on, onboarding, particularly with this remote work environment that we're dealing with. How do you create an onboarding situation, as Jeremy mentioned, that creates an early sense of trust and belonging to people? Often people hear about, the first day at school, if you don't have lunch with a fellow classmate, you feel alienated. So how do you create that sense of trust with new people in your firms? Annie, we'll start with you.
Sure. Thank you so much. So I think that the onboarding process, like Jeremy said, is really critical for setting the tone. And something to consider is the shift in our workforce. So we are becoming more and more attuned to the fact that one communication style, one onboarding program, one option for one employee is not a one size fits all for all employees. Our workforce is becoming much more diverse. And so when we look at the diversity of our workforce, and especially in the younger generation, Kevin, I love a statistic. So I would be happy to rattle off just a couple that I think are super relevant to this conversation. And there's a couple that have come out that I think are really key, which is Pew Research has come out with 48% of Gen Z individuals are considered racial or ethnic minorities. And that's in comparison to millennials in 2002, when only 39% of millennials were considered ethnic or racial minorities. And then Gallup has come out with a poll that a survey that 1 in 6 Gen Z individuals have reported that they're either transgender or queer, compared to 1 in 10 millennials. And on an inclusivity level, nearly 60% of Gen Z individuals believe there should be more gender neutral options on things like online forums. And 35% say they know someone who uses they, them pronouns more than any generation before them. And Gen Z is much more vocal when it comes to its collective focus on this diversity. A study at LinkedIn found that 88% of Gen Z respondents felt that an employer's attitude towards diversity and inclusion was a critical part of their job selection process. And similar findings from Monster said that 83% of Gen Z individuals stating an employer's commitment to diversity and inclusion is significant when choosing where to work. So you see there's more and more expectation of leaders to be more emotionally intelligent, and for the businesses to be driven by this this kind of new set of standards. And so they're also Gen Z is also the only generation to rank respect as one of their number 1 employee value proposition attractors, even over higher compensation. So that's kind of what we're looking at, not just in the onboarding process, but in the entire employee experience.
Wow, those are some eye-opening statistics, Annie. Thanks so much for that. Masai, let me get back to the original question I was going to ask you, and then we'll follow up with something different. It's about onboarding, and people make a lot of investments in new employees these days, and the first week or 2 is critically important to get people, engaged and feeling comfortable. How do you folks do it, and have you changed your, thinking over the years as to onboarding?
Yeah, so it's been an evolution for sure, especially with the pandemic and, working in a hybrid work environment. But, technology aside, being really high touch and intentional with your outreach and engagement, checking in periodically, not just by that supervisor, but we actually have individuals that we assign as buddies, particularly with emerging talent coming into the organization. Doing some intentional outreach directly from the most senior leadership in that first week or two that someone comes on board, that really goes a long way. And, statistically speaking, they say that first 30 to 120 days is really critical, setting the table for what that employee's experience will be. And it does bear out in the numbers. I've unfortunately seen us drop the ball in the past, particularly when we're going through that at that transition period, equipment not arriving when it should, and just that feeling that people should have where we're prepared, we're ready, we're excited to have you here. So again, it's not just one thing, it's the technical piece, but I really feel that human touch and really being high touch and engaging folks is important. And that's what we're focused on. It takes a village, so to speak.
Great insights. Thank you. I think that kind of hits some of what Jeremy was talking about. A lot of the answers are simple. You just have to do them. Before we move on to another topic, Audra, I just like to follow up with you. Does your firm get you involved in helping people get onboarded, i.e. to get them more comfortable day one? Is it a team effort or is it just left to the supervisors?
It's definitely a team effort. We've noticed that people feel more comfortable when there's someone else in the room that they can relate to. And so one thing that Wilson and Company and my team has done a really good job is there's a lot of women in leadership. And so we've done a really good job of hiring a lot of women as well. And so our group's about 50% women in an engineering field, so which was really impressive to me.
Awesome. Thank you. Jeremy, just a quick follow-up on the diverse workforce that Annie was talking about. Do you feel it's more important than ever for firms to have a diverse workforce message to potential new employees that we have a diverse workforce here and promote that fact rather than let new employees just figure it out for themselves when they get there?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely critical. I think promoting a diverse workforce is a strategic imperative to a successful recruiting and retention program. I don't know how you don't promote those features and still be competitive in that space. It's absolutely critical. And making sure people hear that messaging on the front end is super important. I think that's part of developing a purpose-driven culture when people come aboard. And I think that part, I think DEI should be a component of every firm's purpose and every firm's culture. It should be something that we embrace as an industry, as firms, as professionals. And I think the people that we're bringing into the firm need to feel that sense of rigor and vigor around our commitment to those programs and initiatives.
Great. We have a question from the audience. It's a pretty interesting question. So let me ask the group the question, and we'll see who wants to start with answering it. The question basically is, we're talking a lot about culture. I think the questioner recognizes that culture is important. But the question is, at what point is culture less important than a bigger percentage increase in salary? So it's a complicated question. Who wants to tackle that
I'm
one?
really interested to hear what Audra and Jeremy have to say on this one.
Yeah, we'll start with Jeremy. We'll let Audra think about her answer.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's a great question. And no doubt compensation is an important part of the equation. I don't think we're talking about things that are mutually exclusive. I think we're talking about a both and scenario. And so you have to be competitive with compensation. But I think I think it's easier to be, this is going to sound contrary perhaps, it's easier to look at a spreadsheet and calculate numbers to be competitive at market value than it is to generate the emotional intelligence necessary to manage people with empathy and with sensitivity. And I think people typically opt for the former rather than the later. So we definitely have to do our work in terms of being competitive and relevant around compensation, but we have to do the hard work of getting down into the grass roots with people and giving them a sense of belonging and providing interaction. So people are, as I've said many times, people are motivated by three primary things: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And if you can create an environment and a culture where people feel that, and you're being at market value with your compensation, you're going to be able to effectively compete for talent. What I will say is, if you're not being engaged in that way with your people, if they don't feel a sense of autonomy, if they don't feel an opportunity at mastery and purpose, you can pay them all the money in the world and you're going to end up losing that person. So you have to find a way to competitively pay people and reasonably pay people while giving them that ultimate sense of purpose and mastery and autonomy that they're looking for.
Jeremy, just to press on that a little bit more, because I think, the question when it came in was like asking for a specific percentage, right? And so is there a range? Is there a, all things being equal, is there a range at which point that increased salary is going to pull Audra away from her current firm?
Yeah, for sure. And the point, I guess what I would say there is that might not be bad attrition. It might not be a bad thing if someone leaves your firm because of an inordinate salary. That sounds contrary as well. But if the people that are anchored to your firm are the people that are primarily motivated by salary, the question that I would ask is, does that person present a culture fit within the organization? So I can tell you this, that as a percentage, vastly the reason for attrition, both for candidates and employees, so either recruiting or retention, is traceable to compensation and benefits. The number 2 reason is purpose, career pathways. So again, they're not mutually exclusive.
Thanks, Audrey. Audra, do you want to follow up with what your thoughts are on this topic?
Yeah, so for me, culture is really important. I spend more time at work than, sadly, I probably do with my family. I'm here 5 days a week. I'm at home 2 days a week. And so I want to come to work and I want to enjoy the people I'm working with. And to me, being happy at work and having that camaraderie is more important than the money, because at the end of the day, I'm spending every day with the people at work.
If I can give you a real quick example, I'll be very brief with this to sort of support this mindset and what Audra just said. I was talking with a firm leader not long ago who was having a hard time retaining structural engineers. This is in the Northeast, a small firm. He was losing structural engineers to a much larger firm who was recruiting his people actively and promising them adventure bonuses to come over to this other firm. The question is what do I do about that? And my response is, well, you don't try to compete with adventure bonuses. I mean, I don't even know what that means, but if someone's going to leave your firm over an adventure bonus, you have to ask yourself, was this really a long runway employee to begin with? So long runway programs, long runway culture and values and mission and vision produces long runway employees. And we find ourselves getting in a match of keeping up with the Joneses. On compensation and benefits, we're going to be chasing the wind. We have to find out who wants to be here and treat those people in a way that accords with our culture and our vision, our mission, authentically.
Thank you, Jeremy. Just ask Annie and Masai for their thoughts on this matter. You guys deal with these, I'm going to leave, I'm thinking of leaving issues all the time, but respond to this. I do think that more of my successful folks came from people that stayed than left, and more of my unsuccessful senior hires were the people that had a checkered career of multiple stops before they got to my particular place. Do you guys agree with that? And does sort of compensation in our industry over a few years kind of sort itself out, that if you're good and deserving, you end up at that certain level anyway? So I'll start with you on that topic. It's a complicated one, but a lot of people are wrestling with, somebody coming in and saying, hey, X% offer to go across the street. What do you do as an HR professional?
Yeah, Audra makes some great points, as does I'm sorry, Kevin. It's interesting. I actually just had an individual who went to tender their resignation. And I recruited this individual into the organization, and they reached out before they went and spoke to their manager. And I sat down and I walked through the why behind it. And while they were getting a little bit of a bump in salary, it was more about feeling supported as an employee and being recognized for their contribution. And I think that's one thing that we don't do enough of from a reward and recognition perspective when we talk about retaining talent. When we talk about compensation, though, it's really challenging these days. You constantly have to be thinking about internal equity, but because there's such a deficit of talent, there's money out here for infrastructure projects, it is pushing salaries up. And so you can't give everybody a raise. And so what we do is make sure that we're speaking to our operational leaders to make sure, hey, can't give everybody a raise, but make sure you are taking care of the people that you want to retain. And so it's I don't have the perfect answer or a silver bullet for it. We kind of evaluate it on a case-by-case basis, but essentially we're trying to be proactive in really understanding that we've got parity when it comes to compensation internally. But you can throw all the money at someone in the world, and if they've made their decision to leave, they're going to leave. We've got a lot of people, though, who have come back because they find that the grass is not necessarily greener on the other side. And so I think it's important to make sure that when you have people in the organization, you're treating them right. And then if they do leave, they will potentially come back at a different time and more with more training, can contribute potentially at a higher level because it's gone away and they've broadened their skills and increased their leadership capabilities as well.
Okay,
Yeah,
those boomerang employees are often very helpful. Annie, your thoughts on this matter, and we'll move on to another topic.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I was just gonna, I agree with everything that the panelists are saying. And Masai, we have a pretty high rate of boomerang employees too. They think that the grass is going to be greener and they go somewhere and then they realize that it makes a big difference to be seen, valued, and heard. And to Jeremy's point, if you're valuing your employees at fair market value, even if it's not the most competitive price that your employee has heard of, if they feel seen and have pathways towards progression in their career. Now, a lot of people don't leave because of compensation, right? They leave because of other reasons, for management, or like maybe the career opportunities just aren't even there for them. In which case, to Masai's point, you let them. They have to go have their careers, but then also if they do come back, they often have a lot more to offer. So yeah, it goes. They're not mutually exclusive, and they go hand in hand for sure.
Thanks, Annie. Audra, we've heard a lot about career progression, pathways to progression already today, which I like those phrases. How do you personally define career growth, and what development opportunities are most important to you at this stage of your career and maybe the few years before this?
So I don't necessarily define career growth as promotions, but rather as how far I've come. And I have grown so much because I've had really good mentors and supervisors that have challenged me and provided me opportunities for growth. So right now, I feel like I'm becoming a mentor because I had really good mentors to teach me. And I still feel in my stage in my career, it's really important to grow technically too. Because if you want to mentor people, you want to make sure you're up to date on the newest standards or skill sets. So.
Yeah, thanks, Audra. That's for a business that's the business of engineering, we often don't hear about technical career growth as much, which is kind of unbelievable, but it's I think we all know it's true. Jeremy, I'm going to start this next follow-up, I guess, topic with you. Audra mentioned technical development and just progression, learning, feeling like you're moving. What role do you see professional development and continued education playing in overall retention efforts? The most costly hires are the new ones, so if you can keep the ones you've got a great situation. How do firms go about doing that?
It's a great question. I'll say at the outset that professional development first has its intended outcome the advancement and profitability of the firm, right? We're not professionally developing people because we just want to be nice employers that make great careers for people. We have goals and objectives, and to the extent that we're developing and mentoring these employees, to that extent we can expect to achieve our firm's objectives. So we want to be intentional about it because it just makes us a better firm. And when we make better firms, we make more opportunities for people. We're growing and so forth. So, so I think that's important. So the intention then should be for organizations, first of all, to tie their firm's objectives with professional development. What are the goals that we have in terms of growth, business development? Do we want to be for example, the best green building firm or green infrastructure firm in the world? Well, what do we need to do to cultivate development within our people to achieve that? And I begin putting that not only within the competencies around those roles and performance management, but I'm encouraging leadership now to make one-on-one interactions with my people in a way that supports and cultivates that particular end. So getting everybody on the same page in terms of what the firm's goals and objectives are, and creating frameworks for people to understand their performance against those goals and objectives, and then giving them a clear sense of pathways around those competencies, I think is an easy way to go about doing it. We're not doing a lot intentionally around career development or career pathways because we're not doing a lot intentionally around competencies development, and we're not doing a lot around performance management because we're not tying those things back to the objectives of the firm, back to the outcomes that we need as a firm.
That's a great insights, Jeremy. Thanks. Masai, I want to ask you, technical development has come up so far in this discussion, and I know a lot of firms have leadership development programs. How do you feel and your firm feel about developing, engineers both technically and in leadership capacities? And how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, to Jeremy's point, leadership is critical to the organizational success of an organization, as well as the bottom line, ultimately. And at the same time, in the AEC industry, having those technical expertise is fundamental to being a strong and effective leader, because I really feel like it gives you credibility, although I'm not technical by any stretch of the imagination. But sitting in the seat that I do, I see that is critical as well. But we should consider, however, that leaders play a critical role in sustaining employees' interest in their roles, and also inspiring them to reach higher and to excel. Their actions and behaviors can either enhance or hinder the work environment, thereby significantly impacting employee motivation and engagement. So what I'm saying here is that by recognizing this dynamic of leadership, it highlights not only the importance of effective leadership in the existing leadership team, but also underscores the importance of effective leadership development for an organization's long-term success. And this is especially relevant in today's business, where you really need to be agile because there's constant change. And so what I suggest is that the technical aspect is important, but bigger picture and longer term, investing in leadership development should be a top priority, because it's in fact effective leadership that's key to the future success of any organization. So I don't feel comfortable stating that it's an either or situation between the technical or the leadership. It's just about balance. And so it's important to be intentional when investing in and mentoring future leaders, as it directly impacts their ability as future leaders to motivate teams and unlock their potential and navigate change in this ever-changing environment. I'd also like to emphasize that, leadership development shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all approach. Women and individuals coming from underrepresented groups may be confronted with different challenges, and in some cases, barriers to ascend that leadership ladder. And in some instances, these challenges and barriers might actually deter people from pursuing leadership roles in an organization. So the point being here is that leadership development programming should be evaluated through the lens of inclusion and equity, and tailored to the individual group, the individual or the group that you're trying to support. Audra talks about working in a firm that's 50% women. I think that's a testament to the fact that young people, whatever their background might be, like to see people who look like them in leadership roles. And so leading by example and being intentional by promoting people who might not be from the dominant culture of the group, or dominant culture, is important to make sure that we are seeing those people in leadership roles who are making decisions and ultimately will impact the development of those diverse teams because they're looking through the lens of inclusion.
Yeah, thanks, Masai. Annie, I'm gonna ask you for maybe the last word on this topic. And we heard from Masai about women and underrepresented groups, and it seems like your statistics earlier indicated that dominant group, quote unquote, is, very rapidly becoming not so dominant. So how do you create leadership programs specifically that address how folks should handle a more diverse workforce and give them tips to maybe change their game a little bit as opposed to what they have been
Yeah.
doing for the last 20 years?
Yeah, great question. So many different answers. I'll just add on to something Masai was talking about. I agree with everything she just said. And I just wanted to note the disruption in our workforce, not just through diversity, but through rapidly evolving technology. And so skilling, upskilling, reskilling, a workforce is also a really critical part of this whole professional development lens, technically and through those soft skills. And part of that soft skills, to get to your question, Kevin, is when you have not a lot of diversity perhaps in leadership, but this kind of emerging individual contributors and folks on the front line are becoming more diverse, that we get back to this whole one size doesn't fit all piece. And for a manager, it is understandable and it is common for a manager to want to be efficient and to have kind of a set of expectations of how an employee shows up, performs, and communicates. But what we're seeing is that we really have to differentiate for our employees and understand kind of their forms of communication. Everyone has a different way that they communicate verbally, non-verbally, and have different behaviors based on how they were raised, the groups that they are socialized in, their ethnicity, all of these different aspects of what makes up a human is really important for us to recognize. So at Alltag, we do a few different things that I think anyone could take and run with. Like we assess many of our leaders with the Intercultural Development Inventory, the IDI, which is kind of the gold standard globally on assessing intercultural competence, and comes with planning tools to help you improve navigating intercultural differences. And then we also have an inclusion in action framework that lays out a set of behaviors, because it's one thing to have, like, one of our values at Alltag is inclusion. And it's one thing to say that, it's another thing to do it. And in order to do it, because inclusion is an act, we have to understand what goes along with those behavioral expectations. How do you actually behave more inclusively, not just as a manager, but as a team? And we all play a role in it. We're all responsible for it, but it takes practice and skills. It doesn't just, we are all good humans, we can all be good, respectful humans, but learning how to be more inclusive and empathetic is a set of skills that are critical.
Thanks, Annie. Audra, I'm going to ask you our audience loves specifics, so I'm going to ask you to give a specific example. Like the word inclusion, Annie just used, has many different, meanings in each of our minds when we hear it, based on the context that we're hearing it. Can you give us when you were a young professional and you first got included in something, and how it made you feel that you weren't included in before, such as visiting a client, talking about a confidential financial matter, talking about a overrun, budget overrun. I know that this is rare in your life, but occasionally I'm sure you've been part of one. That type of thing where you just went home and said to your husband, who I've met and adores you, by the way, hey, I felt really included because I didn't have to be part of this, but I was, and it made me feel great. Can you give us one example?
So just when I started out at Wilson as an intern. So even as an intern, the senior engineers would take me to meetings. And so just being in those meetings and absorbing everything that was going on with clients and other engineers, coworkers, that helped me feel included on the why, why are we here? Why are we doing this project? And at the same time, I learned a lot. I learned how are these project meetings run? How is the proper way to talk to a client? And that's really important.
Awesome. I think just being included in versus like, I know some of our folks used to work on proposals and then never even hear did we win or lose this? I mean, that's not great inclusionary behavior. Audra, one quick question, and we're going to get the other panelists involved to broaden out leadership and training. We talked about culture. Give us a couple examples of cultural attribute of your firm that resonates with you and the other younger professionals that you hang out with a lot.
For me, I feel like I am valued. I feel like there's events that happen where they include younger staff to lead them. So keeping people involved, giving people a purpose. I feel like companies should invest in their people, and whether that's putting them through continued education or personal coaching, and that resonates with me, is how companies invest in their people, and a company is only as successful as their people are.
Thanks so much for that specificity. Jeremy, we've talked some about leadership and management training and sort of the more inclusionary desires of the younger professional generation. What should firms do to adapt their historical training methods to appeal to the needs of the younger generation in the workforce today?
Well, that's a really great question. I think the basis of that is I think that retention might have as its most important characteristic the sense that someone feels emotionally invested in your firm. So if I feel emotionally invested as an employee, that transcends financial investment, right? So someone who's, what's the old saying? Someone who's, financially invested is looking for a return. Someone who's emotionally invested is looking to contribute. And that's what we want to do, is we want to get people to a place where they feel emotionally invested, and frontline leaders create that sense of investment when they engage their people in informal one-on-one opportunities that mentor, encourage them, give them performance feedback, or what have you. In fact, I think that if you look at incentive programs, for example, incentive programs take up about 14% of direct labor costs. 12% of that goes toward annual incentives tied around merit increases or what have you. Only 2% is tied around informal or spontaneous incentives. And yet when you ask employees what they want, what they'll tell you is, I want direct interaction with my manager. I want direct feedback from my manager. I want incentives that come directly from my manager, because when that happens, they feel like there's less of a machine at work behind that and more of a relationship at work behind that, a human being investing him or herself in another human being. And that's what I think sparks contribution from the employee. So we have to create opportunities for more spontaneous engagement and more spontaneous incentives that are directly traceable to people's performance. I think.
Awesome, Jeremy. Thanks. And, Masai and Annie, both Jeremy and Audra before talked about frontline leadership, frontline supervisors, which is like, I think, the holy grail of our business. Both of you have jobs that you're trying to influence company culture, train frontline supervisors in multi-location engineering firms, whose culture is different in different spots and in different departments. Well, those frontline supervisors have the pressure of winning work, executing work. How do you balance the long-term, retention programs and training of these supervisors with the short-term demands of, winning and executing projects? Annie, we'll start with you, and then we'll go to Masai.
Sure. That's real. That's a real tension every single day. right? We're in a billable industry. We have to perform for our clients. We have to win work. And we also want to not just provide training, but provide tons of well-rounded opportunity. Audra said she spends the majority of her life at work, for good or bad. That's what we do here. And so we want opportunities and pathways for people to connect. Alltag is fully hybrid. About 60% of our workforce is office proximate. Everyone else is fully remote. And so we have extremely flexible workspaces. And we work with our managers and our teams to really set flexible expectations, meaning we give our employees a lot of autonomy to manage what needs to be managed in their life. And of course, they still need to meet their utilization rates and things like that. But then what we do is we provide options. We have our required trainings, like most firms, but we provide options. And then we have to work with managers to give guidance around how to have important conversations with their teammates around the professional and personal development that's most important to them, and then help them carve out those timeframes to participate in the things that are most important to their career and personal development. For example, we'll host bold conversations, we'll have days of understanding, we'll have cultural connecting activities, and we encourage everyone, of course, to participate, knowing that not everyone can, but hopefully there's something for everyone. The other thing we do is we adapt to meet our remote family needs. So meaning, this is a really simple, almost silly example, but we used to be a smaller firm of 300 people. Now that we're over 1,300. And we used to do chili cook-offs in our offices. And that was a big fall event. Well, now we have an office in Canada and an office in Costa Rica, and they don't want to do a chili cook-off, but they do want to participate in our cultural activities. So we adapted it, right? And we now have our offices can do a bring a dish cook-off, and we do asynchronous cook-offs that our leaders participate in, and they'll video themselves, and you can vote on things. So we have to adapt so that there's these asynchronous ways for people to be able to participate in things that make them feel connected to each other. I hope that gets it. I varied out to a few different things, Kevin, but hopefully that gets at your question.
Yeah, no, thanks, Andy. Let me just twist the question a little bit for you. The frontline leaders are really, really important. I think everyone has demonstrated that. And in many cases, at least historically, the frontline supervisor would be the best engineer, the best structural engineer would run the structures department, which may not necessarily be the best frontline leader. How do you reconcile those two skill sets that are needed? And, what do you do about maybe some person's a great leader, but not a great engineer, and vice versa? How do you go about identifying, putting people in the right seat, so to speak?
Well, certainly we track, internal key metrics when it comes to human capital management, like rates of retention and turnover by business line, and of course, continue to drill down. You can certainly identify trends. And so the first step, if you identify a trend where someone's got a higher rate of attrition, particularly if it's a particular group of people, a few years ago, we had one gentleman that just couldn't hold on to younger people. But there was a disconnect from a communication perspective. He was a boomer. Nothing wrong with boomers. But, sometimes the way that they would communicate didn't necessarily click with that younger generation. And so to provide some coaching, whether it's personal or professional coaching internally is something that we've done, or one-on-one coaching with that individual and their manager. Some specific programming and training includes unconscious bias training. That's important when you talk about developing leaders, and then also some leadership development coaching, again, as part of trying to make our leaders more thoughtful and leading through that lens of inclusion. I actually facilitate a session called Lead Training, where we've got cohorts of about 30 people. We walk them through specific scenarios and are really challenged to develop solutions in real time in groups that they can immediately translate into action, or at a minimum force them to think differently when they're confronted with different situations. But I mean, we've been talking a lot about middle management and the impact that they have on the day-to-day experience of employees. In, you know, really being skilled in this area of leadership is something that I don't think you can over invest in. And I don't think it always has to be a formal program. Some of it's just pulling somebody aside and identifying that there are some areas that they can improve on. Middle managers have the ability to build inclusive teams for sure, but also translate organizational goals into what I would call everyday practices. So tying, you know, where the organization's going to what you do day to day as a leader, being able to impart that on the team that you're managing is super important. And ultimately, middle management sets the tone for team behavior and ensuring that diverse perspectives are actively encouraged and valued. And so, you know, again, it's not just one thing. Again, I think some programs could be formal, some more so informal, but modeling inclusive behavior by middle managers is so important to influencing overall culture. But you know, I don't know if hopefully I answered your question and gave you some insight here, because we can go on and on. But I guess the point being, depending on the size of the organization, it may determine what approach you may take. An organization of 5,000 people may have more resources available to put together some more formal coaching programs. But if an organization is committing to retaining top talent, again, that leadership influence is so important, and just being mindful of that and making a core part of your culture as an organization, I think, is key. So leading by example is important.
Yeah, Masai, thanks for really a lot for those insights. We have a question from the audience. Audra, this one specifically addressed to you. Mentorship, leadership, accessibility has come up a lot, and one of our audience members wants to know specifically, where do you find you get your most needed mentorship and leadership access? You know, what type of person in your organization do you need that from the most, and how do you go about getting it? Personally?
For me, you have to be really intentional and not be afraid to ask questions. So I feel like I have multiple mentors within the company. There's senior engineers that they have so much history, so smart, that I'm going to go ask them for my technical. And then you have folks that are in more of the leadership on the business side of things. And so those are the mentors that I'm going to go ask questions about the business side. But I feel as a young professional, you have to be intentional. You have to not be afraid to go ask questions and ask why.
Okay. Yeah, just why are we doing it? The answer often leads to an insight you didn't have.
Kevin,
Thanks so much for that.
just as a follow on to that. So, you know, obviously Audra is very intentional, I'm sure, in what she's doing, but you also have employees who may not be, right? Or who may be more introverted, maybe you know, kind of not skilled at going and asking, or comfortable at going and asking. And I'm just curious, you know, from the others, Jeremy, Annie, Masai, is there anything kind of proactive from a firm standpoint that you do to create that interaction, that, you know, the Audras of the world who are being intentional versus those that might not be?
You know, I think that we have these performance reviews that we do once a year often, right? And I really feel like they should be far more frequent. Those are opportunities that you have to interact directly with an employee in a private, more personal setting, where you can really engage with them. And if it's somebody who might be introverted, or someone who just may see some barriers that they want to talk through to their advancement, you're able to do it by having these one-on-one sessions. So we should be using those one-on-ones, which I have with my team once a month, to talk about career path, to talk about really how comfortable they're feeling with what they're doing today, opportunity for state interviews. So that one-on-one interaction from a supervisor to employee, I think, is critical. Doesn't cost you money. It may take some time, but at the end of the day, I think it's invaluable when you look at grooming people for greatness, so to speak, as they move through their career, but then also being proactive at identifying some challenges that this individual might be dealing with in their day-to-day at work.
Can I
Great.
tag on to
Yes, sorry.
that? Sorry.
Yes.
Sure.
So with that, I do feel like as a leader, it is important to build relationships with your staff and get to know them, because if you make them feel comfortable, they'll feel more comfortable going and asking you questions. And so you're making yourself more approachable as a leader for them to get out of their comfort zone to go talk to you and ask you the questions that they have.
Yeah, it's so common for people to enter a job, a firm, and never have had the experience of having a career development conversation with a manager. And those, like to Masai's point and Audra's point, should be happening on the regular, encouraging your team members to have a career development plan and to consistently and to have a template for that career development plan that lays out what is needed, and to compare it, Jeremy, to the matrices for like the career lattices in your organization and figure out, okay, well, what skills are you missing? And what we do at Alltech is who do you need to talk to at the firm, right? And that can be an informal mentoring situation, a coaching situation. And then of course we have formal mentoring programs where we match people and have a kind of mentoring curriculum. But just knowing and being able to have a conversation. I hired someone a little over a year ago, and 3 months into their job, I gave them the career development plan template, and they were like, "What?" But then so excited and really took it seriously. But it's not a static thing, right? We go back to it and at all of our quarterly check-ins and update it and figure out what needs to change. And that's a really empowering type of conversation.
Awesome discussion. Jeremy, I've got the next question for you, but before I go there, I just want to mention an important thing that Masai said that I just don't want it to get overlooked by our audience, that they measure retention by direct supervisor. I think it's a key statistic to measure by frontline supervisors. Make sure you got the right people in the right jobs and you're not leaking oil and not recognizing it. Jeremy, early stage professionals seem to be, demanding a little bit more, want more inclusion, want more communication. What does your firm and you think when you're helping to advise firms, what's the biggest disconnect between what early stage professionals want and what firms are still trying to offer as it relates to retention strategies? What could firms do to change their plans to be more effective?
I got to tell you that I see the broad spectrum of actions out there, initiatives. Most of them come across as rather disingenuous gimmicks, to be quite honest with you. I think that there's a lot of attempts to create things without really listening to what the fundamental issue is. And so, we're in a situation today as an industry, for example, where we're trying to catch up with wage debt. We have wage debt. If you're familiar with that concept, it basically says we're paying some people more than others because of some of the dynamics around the hockey stick economy that we're in and the growth of this industry. Well, why is that? Well, because we're trying too much to create compensation strategies that don't have long-term thoughtfulness to them. We need to create opportunities for engagement that are thoughtful and don't get into the range of gimmicks. And because our employees will sniff those out in a moment. I love where this conversation has been around leadership development. If I trace back every part of this conversation back to employee development, performance management, engagement, emotional intelligence, et cetera, et cetera. It all ties back to the efficacy of that frontline leader. And so if I want to impact retention at my firm, the best investment I think I can make, or at least one in the top three, is leadership development. And I think that's what I would encourage firms to really begin doing. If they're looking at trying to find a way to get ahead of the retention and recruiting crisis, invest in leadership development, because that's where retention is falling apart. I think it's falling apart in the engagement with those frontline leaders.
Agreed.
Awesome. I've got 2 questions left. We got a few minutes. So I'm going to ask one and then hopefully get a quick answer from you. Then we'll go to the last one. But Jeremy used the phrase emotionally invested, which is probably a good euphemism for loyalty. So the question I've got is, what can firms do to create a sense of loyalty or emotional investment among employees beyond just, competitive compensation? What are 1 or 2 things firms should be doing more of to create that loyalty and emotional investment among the employees? Let's start with Audra. We'll give you're first up on the dais here.
So I know we've talked about this a lot, but giving people a sense of purpose and including them, I think it's important that not all decisions are made at the top, that you talk to your people and you bring others into the conversation. Everyone has different ways of thinking what's important to them. And so I think it's good to make sure that your people are heard. And I feel like if people are heard, then they feel valued as well and want to stay.
Awesome. Jeremy, you're up next.
Yeah, I think that if you were to define loyalty, one word would come to mind, and that is a sense of genuine allegiance, right? There's a genuine allegiance that defines loyalty. And I think that there's anything that produces genuine allegiance, it's trust. And so if I, as a firm, operate in a way that's transparent and merits trust within my employees, open book management, I'm talking about pay transparency, the kinds of things that everybody else is thinking people are making decisions in the closet about. When I open up the closet, I let people know, here's the performance of the firm. Here's why we do what we do. Here's where you fall in the scheme of those particular things, our profit and loss. People begin to understand the big picture, and they feel like someone is seeing them beyond the mode of just a mechanism. They actually are an integral part of that overall machine that's trying to be a profitable, successful business. And I think that kind of transparency and trust goes a long way to build loyalty. Sure.
Great answer. Masad.
Yeah, and particularly when it comes to younger people, to piggyback on what Jeremy was saying, we talk about transparency. I know early on in my career, I benefited from understanding what impact the efforts that I made as a person who was in sales and business development at the time, how I contributed to the growth of the organization, what impact my day-to-day contribution made. And to be able to talk through that with younger people, to give them a better sense of, where we're headed as an organization and how you can once again contribute to that. I think that will help to build that loyalty, because people will then feel like they are not just taking a paycheck home every day, right? They're investing in themselves, they're investing in their future. And ultimately that organization is doing the same thing. And then collectively we can hit our goals together. So just being more open about the why behind what we're doing, and helping to support people through that journey as they grow through their career, by teaching them not just the technical side of what we do, but the business side of what we do.
Great, thank you. Annie.
Yeah, I'll just add on to some of the wonderful things that were already said. Jeremy, I agree, trust. At Alltag, it's part of our employee value proposition to trust our employees by providing them the flexibility and autonomy they need to be able to manage their work-life balance, to be able to get the job done well, and to be able to give them the tools and resources that are needed to help them thrive and succeed. And so if they're not experiencing that, then something's wrong, which means that we have something called advocacy and support pathways, that if an employee if their employee experience doesn't match our employee value proposition, there are multiple ways that they can talk about that with various people, and we need to work to address it. And so we start foundationally with trust. And then if it is broken, we have it is our due diligence to work to repair that, because that's the bottom line.
Awesome, thank you. Jeremy, last question, a quick one. From both a young professional and executive perspective, the industry's got a lot of challenges on retention from outside forces. What's the biggest threat to long-term retention in the industry today, from your perspective?
Well, I said this once before, I think it's leadership narcissism. I think it's the notion that I can't crawl out of my space to see broad enough to understand that business is a business focused on profitability through the mechanism of people. And to the extent that I'm creating intentionality around giving people a sense of belonging, giving people a sense of inclusion, giving people a sense of ownership and transparency, I can expect my business to thrive. It has to be something that happens as a top-down culture. And I think that we need some smelling salt in that regard.
Well, that you woke me up with the smelling salt reference. I'm going to turn it over to Daphne. Thank you so much. Awesome panel. Wish we could go on for another hour. It was great. Thank you all so much. Daphne, you've got the football.
Thank you. And thanks to our audience for the questions that were submitted. I do want to remind you that we do have part 3 coming up on October 29th. And that again is focused on ownership transition. How do you get this younger generation involved and committed long-term? And so we hope you'll be able to join us for that. Thank you, Audra, Masai, Annie, Jeremy, and Kevin, for a great conversation. Appreciate that. We also have to thank our sponsors at the ACEC Research Institute, who make all of this possible. Without them, we would not be able to do the work we've been doing. So we appreciate all of these firms, individuals, foundations, affiliates, and organizations who are supporting the Institute. If you'd like to be added to this list, please give me a call. I'd love to talk to you. Hope you all are well, and we look forward to seeing many of you, if not all of you, at the fall conference later this month. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.